is not automatically written from a nationalist perspective. Over a long period of time, the colonized have devoted their energy to eliminating iniquities such as forced labor, corporal punishment, unequal wages, and the restrictions of political rights. This fight for democracy against man's oppression gradually emerges from a universalist, neoliberal Confucian to arrive, sometimes laboriously, at a demand for nationhood. But the unpreparedness of the elite, the lack of practical ties between them and the masses, their apathy, and yes, their cowardice at the crucial moment in the struggle are the cause of tragic trials and tribulations. Instead of being the coordinated crystallization of the people's innermost aspirations, instead of being the most tangible, immediate product of popular mobilization, national consciousness is nothing but a crude, empty, fragile shell. The cracks in it explain how easy it is for young independent countries to switch back from nation to ethnic group and from state to tribe. A regression which is so terribly detrimental and prejudicial to the development of the nation and national unity. As we shall see, such shortcomings and dangers derive historically from the incapacity of the national bourgeoisie in underdeveloped countries to rationalize popular praxis. In other words, their incapacity to attribute it any reason. The characteristic, virtually endemic weakness of the underdeveloped countries' national consciousness is not only the consequence of the colonized subjects' mutilation by the colonial regime, it can also be attributed to the apathy of the national bourgeoisie, its mediocrity, and its deeply cosmopolitan mentality. The national bourgeoisie, which takes over power at the end of the colonial regime, is an underdeveloped bourgeoisie. Its economic clout is practically zero, and in any case, no way commensurate with that of its metropolitan counterpart, which it intends replacing. In its willful narcissism, the national bourgeoisie has lulled itself into thinking that it can supplant the metropolitan bourgeoisie to its own advantage. But its independence, which literally forces it back against the wall, triggers catastrophic reactions and obliges it to send out distress signals in the direction of the former metropolis. The business elite and university graduates who make up the most educational category of the new nation are identifiable by their small numbers, their concentration in the capital, and their occupations as traders, landowners, and professionals. This national bourgeoisie possesses neither industrialists nor financiers. The national bourgeoisie in the underdeveloped countries is not geared to production, invention, creation, or work. All its energy is channeled into intermediary activities. Networking and scheming seem to be its underlying vocation. The national bourgeoisie has the psychology of a businessman, not that of a captain of industry. And it should go without saying that the rapacity of the colonists and the embargo system installed by colonialism hardly left it any choice. So, by virtue of the workings of the colonial system, the national bourgeoisie is underdeveloped, only being that of basically middlemen, instead of having among it industrialists or professionals capable of creating new or novel forms of production. The embargo system leaves the national bourgeoisie reliant on external production, which is the purview of the colonizer. In the next paragraph, he details how, more often than not, the national bourgeoisie does not share its knowledge from colonial education, but opts to attempt to maintain its privilege. So, let's continue. Under the colonial system, a bourgeoisie that accumulates capital is in the realm of the impossible. To our thinking, therefore, the historical vocation of an authentic national bourgeoisie in an underdeveloped country is to repudiate its status as bourgeois and an instrument of capital, and to become entirely subservient to the revolutionary capital which the people represent. In an underdeveloped country, the imperative duty of an authentic national bourgeoisie is to betray the vocation to which it is destined, to learn from people and make available to them the intellectual and technical capital it culled from its time in colonial universities. We will see, unfortunately, that the national bourgeoisie often turns away from this heroic and positive path, which is both productive and just, and unabashedly opts for the anti-national and therefore abhorrent path of a conventional bourgeoisie. A bourgeois bourgeoisie that is dismally, inanely, cynically bourgeois. We have seen that the objective of the nationalist parties from a certain period onward is geared strictly along national lines. They mobilize the people with the slogan of independence, and anything else is left to the future. When these parties are questioned on their economic agenda for the nation or the regime, they prove incapable of giving an answer because, in fact, they do not have a clue about the economy of their own country. This economy has always developed outside their control. As for the present and potential resources of their country's soil and subsoil, their knowledge is purely academic and approximate. They can only talk about them in general and abstract terms. After independence, this underdeveloped bourgeoisie, reduced in number, lacking in capital, and rejecting the road to revolution, stagnates miserably. It cannot give free expression to its genius that was in the past hampered by colonial domination, or so it claims. The precariousness of its resources and the scarcity of managerial talent forces it, for years, into an economy of cottage industries. It is inevitably highly limited. In its inevitably highly limited perspective, the bourgeoisie's idea of a national economy is one based on what we can call local products. Grandiloquent speeches are made about local crafts, unable to establish factories which would be profitable for the country and for themselves. The bourgeoisie cloaks local artisanship in a chauvinistic tenderness, which not only ties in with the new national dignity, but also ensures them substantial profits. This cult for local products, this incapacity to invent new outlets, is likewise reflected in the entrenchment of the national bourgeoisie, in the type of agricultural production typical of the colonial period. Independence does not bring a change of direction. The same old groundnut harvest, cocoa harvest, and olive harvest. Likewise, the traffic of commodities goes unchanged. No industry is established in the country. We continue to ship raw materials, we continue to grow produce for Europe, and pass for specialists of unfinished products. Yet the national bourgeoisie never stops calling for the nationalization of the economy and the commercial sector. In its thinking, to nationalize does not mean placing the entire economy at the service of the nation or to satisfy all its requirements. To nationalize does not mean organizing the state on the basis of a new program of social relations. For the bourgeoisie, nationalization signifies very precisely the transfer into indigenous hands of privileges inherited from the colonial period. So basically, the national bourgeoisie wants to recreate the colonial society, only this time with the colonizers without the colonizers present, so that the bourgeoisie becomes the dominant class in the country, but nothing else really changes. So that the only hands basically changing are, it's an indigenous bourgeoisie instead of a foreign bourgeoisie. But other than that, nothing would really change. Since the bourgeoisie has neither the material means nor adequate intellectual resources, such as engineers and technicians, it limits its claims to the takeover. Oh. Hold on 1 second. Cat's screaming. Since the... Oh. Come here, boo-boo. Since the bourgeoisie... Oh. Hold on. Say hello, Maurice. Okay. I know you can't see him, but he was sniffing at the mic. Okay. Since the bourgeoisie has neither the material means nor adequate intellectual resources, such as engineers and technicians, it limits its claim to the takeover of businesses and firms previously held by the colonists. The national bourgeoisie replaces the former European settlers as doctors, lawyers, tradesmen, agents, dealers, and shipping agents. For the dignity of the country and to safeguard its own interests, it considers its duty to occupy all these positions. Henceforth, it demands that every major foreign company must operate through them if it wants to remain in the country or establish trade. The national bourgeoisie discovers its historical mission as intermediary. As we have seen, its vocation is not to transform the nation, but prosaically serve as a conveyor belt for capitalism, forced to camouflage itself behind the mask of neo-colonialism. The national bourgeoisie, with no misgivings and with great pride, revels in the role of agent in its dealings with the Western bourgeoisie. This lucrative role, this function as a small-time racketeer, this narrow-mindedness and lack of ambition are symptomatic of the incapacity of the national bourgeoisie to fulfill its historic role as bourgeoisie. The dynamic, pioneering aspect, the inventive, discoverer of new worlds aspect common to every national bourgeoisie is here lamentably absent. At the core of the national bourgeoisie of the colonial countries is a hedonistic mentality. A hedonistic mentality prevails because on a psychological level it identifies with the Western bourgeoisie from which it has slurped every lesson. It mimics the Western bourgeoisie in its negative and decadent aspects without having accomplished the initial phases of exploration and invention that are the assets of the Western bourgeoisie, whatever the circumstances. In its early days, the national bourgeoisie of the colonial countries identifies with the last stages of the Western bourgeoisie. Don't believe it is taking shortcuts. In fact, it starts at the end. It is already senile, having experienced neither the exuberance nor the brazen determination of youth and adolescence. In its decadent aspect, the national bourgeoisie gets considerable help from the Western bourgeoisie, who happens to be tourists enamored of exoticism, hunting, and casinos. The national bourgeoisie establishes holiday resorts and playgrounds for entertaining the Western bourgeoisie. This sector gives the name of tourism and becomes a national industry for this very purpose. We only have to look at what has happened in Latin America if we want proof of the way the ex-colonized bourgeoisie can be transformed into party organizer. The casinos in Havana and Mexico City, the beaches of Rio, Copacabana, and Acapulco, the young Brazilian and Mexican girls, the 13-year-old mestizas, are the scars of this deprivation of the national bourgeoisie. Because it is lacking in ideas, because it is inward-looking, cut off from the people, sapped by its congenital incapacity to evaluate issues on the basis of the nation as a whole, the national bourgeoisie assumes the role of manager for the companies of the West and turns its country virtually into a bordello for Europe. So, basically, the national bourgeoisie's decadence and complacency pushes it to transform the country into a playground for capitalists and the bourgeoisie of industrialized post-colonial societies. They become playgrounds for the rich. That's why people go to like foreign countries for like sex tourism type stuff and doing all kinds of horrific stuff. It's purely because this national bourgeoisie comes into contact and basically shills for the international bourgeoisie after it pushes the international bourgeoisie out of the country, or the colonial bourgeoisie. Once again, we need only to look at the pitiful spectacle of certain republics in Latin America. U.S. businessmen, banking magnates, and technocrats jet down to the tropics, and for a week to 10 days wallow in the sweet depravity of their private reserves. The behavior of the national landowners is practically the same as that of the urban bourgeoisie. As soon as independence is proclaimed, the big farmers demand the nationalization of the agricultural holdings. Through a number of schemes, they manage to lay hands on the farms once owned by the colonists, thereby reinforcing their control over the region. But they make no attempt to diversify, increase production, or integrate it in a genuinely national economy. In fact, the landowners call on the authorities to create 100-fold the facilities and privileges now theirs, but once reserved for the foreign colonists. The exploitation of farm workers is intensified and justified. Capitalizing on 2 or 3 slogans, these new colonists demand a colossal effort from these farm laborers. In the name of national interest, of course. There is no modernization of agriculture, no development plan, no initiative, for initiatives imply a degree of risk. And would throw such milieus into a panic and put to flight a wary, overcautious, landed bourgeoisie, which is sinking deeper and deeper into the ruts established by colonialism. In such regions, initiatives are handled by the government. It is the government which approves them, encourages them, and finances them. The landed bourgeoisie refuses to take the slightest risk. It is hostile to gambling and ventures. It has no intention of building upon sand. It demands solid investments and quick returns. The profits it pockets are enormous compared to the gross national product and are not reinvested. Its only mentality is to hoard its savings. The bourgeoisie, especially in the aftermath of independence, has no scruples depositing in foreign banks the profits it has made from all the national resources. Major sums, however, are invested for the sake of prestige in cars, villas, and all those ostentatious goods described by economists as typical of an underdeveloped bourgeoisie. The national bourgeoisie takes cues from their colonial counterparts and deposits their savings in foreign banks, invests only in themselves, and is averse to taking risks, is the basic point of that last paragraph. Thank you for watching this reading of Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth. If you enjoy what you saw, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't done so already. I've got my Twitch and Twitter handles up there. I'll also have links to those in the description. Twitch is where we record most of these videos, and then I edit them together into a more cohesive, less rambly bit. There's also ways you can support me in this channel, and links to my Discord, my music, all that kind of fun stuff. So if you enjoyed it, please consider hitting those up. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.